welcome back. I hope that you did not spend your break collaborating against me and to fight against my horribly cruel interpretation of the snowman as too mean to root for. Um, anyways, let's talk about his goals and the action behind them. So, after establishing the snowman as a character, the film's next logical step is to establish his goal. So as he glares at this happy group, the Beach Babe figurine from Miami waves at the snowman. Fun fact, I'm going to do a little sidetrack here. Warning ahead of time makes it a little clearer. So in the first iteration of Knick Knack, the woman had a much larger chest than in the version that went before Finding Nemo, the more commonly seen version. And it's only worth noting because it kind of shows that in the very early days, Pixar was not a family-friendly, let's all produce films for the kids and their parents company. They were a bit edgier. They were willing to have kind of sex jokes and be a little crazy. And so this is mostly just to point out that they have the potential not to just be the traditional family-friendly studio that you know about. They are willing to experiment. And so they do have a very specific demographic now, but they didn't always, and that means they can, again, they are capable of pushing the boundaries a bit. Why I point that out, just for fun, but it's just something to know about. And so the babe excites the snowman, and her beckoning causes him to shift from grumpiness to desperation. So suddenly he's not just grumpy about staying in a snowman, he really wants to get out because he has the attention of this attractive figurine and he wants to come join her. And so we know this based off of the way his eyebrows waves, and the way his hat pops up, that those we now know are sexual attraction. Like, it's not like, oh, I love the way she looks at me and the way she makes jokes and her kind heart. No, this is all based off her physical appearance, and it helps that he is objectifying a literal object. I will admit that was my favorite joke of the whole project, so I hope you laughed. So he's attracted to this woman, and we know this based off his expressions. Also, his hat pop is kind of his equivalent of the plume wiggle or Luxa's wiggle. It's kind of his distinctive gesture. And the important thing about pointing out that it's a sexual attraction, not a romantic one, is that it makes his desire a base desire, and therefore the stakes stay really low. This is not Romeo and Juliet. This is well, I was trying to think of a nicer synonym to horny, and I can't. So it's just about a horny old snowman. And so if this had been romantic, it would have been a different film. And a failure on the snowman's part could cause the film to kind of fall into melancholy. So it's an important distinction from the love stories that Pixar will tackle in later films, like Blue Umbrella, and features like Up and WALL-E. But if this were a love story, he would end the film lost, lonely, and pining for his love as opposed to vaguely annoyed. It would be a sad ending a la Red Stream as opposed to a funny ending a la Warner Brothers. So ultimately all he wants to do is flirt, and her personality is reduced to a wave and slight bobbing along to the music. And so the lack of sentiment means that the audiences can enjoy his attempts to get out because we don't have to anticipate pain in the face of failure. We are supposed to see if he makes it, but we are not emotionally invested in his end goal. So the core of Knick Knack and many other cartoons is a sequence of various failed attempts to solve the same problem. And I stumbled over that, and I want to make it clear again, because this is the very basic basis of cartoon plotting. sequence of various failed attempts to help solve the same problem. It's kind of like the definition of insanity made funny. You keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, except they're doing slight tweaks to the same task, hoping for a different result. And so, to get a little more technical, though, the sequence is what Disney animators Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson called the second principle of animation, which is, quote, anticipation, end quote. The joy in watching the film comes from anticipating what the filmmakers, through the characters, will come up with next. In the case of the snowman, it's all the different methods for breaking the glass. With each iteration, starting with the plastic igloo and ending with TNT, the solutions become more extreme and less plausible. These gags are anticipatory gags, providing the setup for each attempt in one shot, but leaving the failure for the next shot. As Thomas and Johnson explain, quote, the anticipatory moves may not show why he is doing something, but there is no question what he is doing or what he is going to do next, expecting that the audience can now enjoy the way it is done, end quote. This is not the first time the animators have dealt with anticipation in a Pixar film. Luxo Jr.'s introductory stillness was an example of such, and as was the baby playing with the bag in Tin Toy. In Knick Knack, the audience has time in between to wonder how the snowman is going to fail, and then is rewarded by seeing the clever method the animator came up with. So the best example of this is the penultimate plan, which is when the snowman attempts to use a flamethrower to get through the glass. He struggles for a second, trying to get the fire to light under the water. And so in that moment, it seems as if the animators decided to follow the rules of real physics and sabotage the snowman's plan that way. But in the next shot, the gas abruptly gets lit, which is what neither the audience nor the snowman expected, and it sends him flying backwards. So it's another moment like Luxo coming to life and Lumpy falling, where animators play with the audience's sense of reality. The fact that there are so many examples makes sense when the medium is taken into consideration. And animation is entirely man-made. And manipulated. So it can be as fantastical or as real as one wishes and as the technology allows. And so, again, we come back to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Because my favorite joke in the entire film, it's a very knowing joke. And again, it might have flown by if you're not familiar with animation history. But there's this elaborate gag where Roger is handcuffed to the protagonist. And they don't have the key. And so they are in their headquarters, and a bunch of villains show up, and they have to hide from the villains. And it gets complicated by the fact that Roger is attached to the protagonist. So only Roger has to hide. The main protagonist can be seen. So there's an elaborate gag of Roger hiding in a bathtub and holding his breath as the villains are looking at him, and rapidly getting up to get a breath while they're looking away and going back under. And it's all based off of the fact that they're handcuffed together. Elaborate sequence that ends after the villains get away. It's successful. And after all that, Roger just kind of gets out of the handcuffs, no problem, because he's a cartoon. And then the main protagonist, Frank, looks at him as kind of like, what happened? Why did you do that? Why didn't you do that before? And he said, well, if I did it before, it wouldn't have been funny. So, elaborate setup for this one joke, which explains that cartoon physics should not be manipulated unless there is a purpose behind it, and for many cartoons, that purpose is to be funny. So it shows that this manipulation of world and physics is motivated by story as opposed to verisimilitude. So when you watch a film and get frustrated that it's not realistic, that's not quite what you're frustrated with, because if you were watching a film that deliberately manipulated physics or reality, it should have told you as much beforehand or given you the right format to kind of process that. And this is how cartoons does it. It handles the history you go in with and makes a joke out of reality. And since the end goal in Knick Knack is not to ultimately make viewers feel something due to a shared experience, but instead to make them laugh, the fact that it makes no sense for the snowman to have all these tools available to him means very little. So it's an example of this concept. Like, we don't go into Knick Knack expecting it to be quote unquote real. And so instead we want to see it manipulated in ways that make us laugh. And this, again, is how it's done. And since it's this kind of unwritten contract with the viewer, that Knick Knack is highly ridiculous fiction, the only important thing about the snowman's plan is that it cannot work. Because if it works, then the whole series of gags is ruined. So, another 10 minutes gone. Let's take another break. We're going to come back and talk about his expressions and talk about more of his actions. But I will see you in a few minutes.